some things that we were caught up in at the beginning of '09. We are still dealing with the case of one of my friends from Detroit, Michigan, Dr. Robert Smith says, a case of stuck-itis. We are still stuck in some things, stuck in some places, but I come with good news tonight to tell you that it's time to move forward. I know that there are those who have suggested to you that this is the benediction for your blessings, that there is nothing else that you can do to move forward. They have already written you off, but I come to tell you tonight to tell them that no longer will you remain where you've been, but you have determined and you have resolved that you are going to move forward. Now, if we are going to move forward, we've got to understand that the master has mandated the move. You don't believe me tonight? Look in the text. The text says, verse 35, when evening came, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. He's simply saying, in order for you to get to the determined destination, it's dependent whether or not you will follow divine directions. Look at what he says. He said is in the present tense, active voice, indicative mood, meaning that Jesus, active voice, the subject, is the doer of the action, so Jesus is the speaker. And it's in the present tense, suggesting that it is a continuous action. Now, he's speaking to them. It's in the indicative mood, the mood of reality, simply saying, if Jesus says it, whether I believe it or not, that settles it. He says, let us pass over to the other side. Now, he gives them directions, but it does not stop at direction, but he gives them destination. And I like the Lord that he does not just tell us one part, but does not finish the rest. He says, if I start with you, I know how to finish with you. Now he says, let us pass. I like the fact that he's inclusive in his argument, because he says, I don't want you to go by yourself. Now, mind you, Jesus has been dealing with the crowd, and he wants to get away from the crowd, so he tells the disciples to get in the boat, and they all get in the boat, and he says, let us pass. Pass is in the subjunctive mood. That is the mood of possibility and the mood of probability. It means that it can happen, it has the potential to happen, but if it's going to happen, it's going to be because you hinge everything on the word of the Lord. Now, let me help somebody tonight. You may be in a situation right now where it seems that you are stuck on the western side of the sea. But Jesus is saying, I want to take you to the other side. But in order for you to get to the other side, you've got to adhere to what I am saying to you. In essence, instead of us trying to put the Lord on our agenda, I like how the Blackaby brothers said that in their book, Spiritual Leadership. They say that we are trying to get on God's agenda. The problem is we can't get to the other side because too many folk have their own agendas. But when we get on God's agenda, God would get us to the other side. Now, Jesus says, let us pass over to the other side. He says, now, if you're going to get there, you've got to adhere to my directions. He's telling his disciples that I have a plan for you. I have a purpose for you. And if you read on in Mark and you go to chapter 5, there is a demonic man on the other side in Gadara who's been cutting himself with stones night and day, up in the mountains, back down in the graveyard. But when Jesus gets to the other side with his disciples, this man who has a problem rushed to Jesus and he says, what do I have to do with thee? And Jesus says, all he tells the man is, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Then the man is now sitting clothed and in his right mind. Sometimes the Lord wants to get us from one side to another side because there's ministry waiting on us. But the problem is we become so stagnant as to where we are. We are so complacent as to where we are. We don't like to get out of our comfort zones. And getting out of our comfort zones meaning that I have to deal with change. In order for these disciples to get to the other side, they are going to have to experience change. It is an inevitable agent if you're going to move forward. There are a lot of people who like to talk about moving forward, but really the truth of the matter is it's really rhetoric. folk like to talk about getting out of things. But when the rubber meets the road, and when the reality of changing and moving forward meets them head on, and they realize what it's going to take to move forward, then we start to have reluctance. The disciples, in the text, Jesus says to him, let us pass over to the other side. But you've got to understand, if you're going to move forward, you've got to be careful of the crowd that you are connected to. Sometimes moving forward can be hindered because you're hanging out with the wrong people. Look at the text. The Bible says in verse 36, leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. In order for them to get from one point to another, the Bible says that they left the crowd. And then it says that they took Jesus along with him. Yes, sir. Now this word took is paralambano. Para, which means alongside, lambano, which means to take, simply suggesting that they was taking Jesus alongside with them. Now, if you're going to get to the other side, you've got to disconnect from the wrong folk and get connected with the right folk. And they realized that if they were going to move to the other side, they had to leave some people. Now, let me bring that closer to you. There are some folk right in your own company that you need to leave alone. There are some folk that are hindering your progress. And the truth of the matter is, you're struggling and you're working hard. You're doing everything to maintain relationships and friendships with them. But you are the one that's doing all of the work. And every time you turn around, you're the one that's trying to make things right. You are the one that's giving. You are the one that's giving up. But you don't discover that they are giving anything in return. There is no law of reciprocity taking place in the relationship. You've got to find out somewhere how to drop some folk off and leave them behind, and say that I can't make it any further with you. I've got to let some folk go. And there are some folk around us with the crab mentality. They don't want to move forward, and they don't want you to move forward. Watch out for the folk that you spend too much time with. I have resolved that I'm not going to hang out with folk that don't want to move forward. I have resolved that I'm not going to waste my time hanging around folk that have no purpose in life, no direction in life. They don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to do anything. And every time you try to talk about going forward, they're trying to pull you back, telling you, you can't make it. You can't do it. What if the disciples had hung out with the crowd? They never would have gotten to the other side. But the truth of the matter is, you've got to know who to put on your team. They knew that if they had Jesus on the team, they knew that, and it says they took him as he was. Now the writer of the text has some specific details, and the fact that they say they took him as he was, you've got to know that Mark wants to expose the humanity of Jesus. Jesus was so fatigued from teaching and preaching all day that he wanted to get away from the crowd. And let me say this as a side note. Sometimes, even in ministry, you've got to take a break from people. Because if you're going to do everything everybody wants you to do to try to make everybody happy, somewhere you're going to lose out for yourself. So you've got to learn to step away from the crowd. Jesus goes with the disciples. And in the text, as he goes with the disciples, if you're going to move forward, the Bible says that even moving forward suggests that there are going to be some misfortunate moments when we move forward.